Welcome everyone to this Thursday's Matter event. I'm Nicole and I'll be your host for today. Thursday's Matter is a weekly virtual meetup welcoming experts from around the globe to explore a wide range of topics that touch on software development and the tech industry as a whole. Today's edition is presented by Skills Matter and Codurance. Software craftsmanship is at the heart of everything Codurance does, and this is how they continuously deliver great software. They've taken these same values and incorporated them into the Codurance Compass assessment tool. This tool will help you understand the current levels of organizational maturity across 5 distinct areas of software delivery in your company. I'll share more about how you can access this tool in just a few moments. We're pleased today to have the team behind this great approach at Codurance, Sandro, Mash, and Steve, with us here today to share their thoughts in a really cool, interactive, conversational format. Before we begin though, I'd like to run through a few quick housekeeping items. First, you can find out more about today's session and our panelists in the link I've added to the chat feature in this webinar. As this talk is being recorded, the video of today's event will also be found on that page as early as tomorrow. This chat feature of the webinar is also where you can find out more about our partner Codurance and the good work that they do. You will also find the link to the Compass assessment tool that I mentioned earlier. It's via this link that you can fill out an assessment, and I expect to receive a detailed report following that, which you can share with your scores and recommendations and areas of improvement. I'll add all these links along with the Codurance contact info and their site into the chat in just a few minutes. Feel free to also use this chat feature to leave any comments and learning points, or perhaps just share a little bit about where you're joining us from today. Should you have any questions on the content of the session or anything for the panelists, however, please place these in the Q&A feature of this webinar. These are the questions we will be reviewing throughout the session, throughout the whole conversational format, and our panelists will aim to answer them as we go along. Only questions added to that feature will be considered. We'll also be posting a quick feedback poll, just one brief question following the session, and we'd really appreciate your input there. Finally, Skills Matter is proud to be part of an inclusive and welcoming community, and we do have a code of conduct in place. I will add this link to the chat as well. Please bear it in mind when contributing to the chat and Q&A features of this webinar. And now, without further ado, we are delighted to introduce Sandro, Mash, and Steve of Codurance, who will be sharing their thoughts on software modernization. Over to you, Sandro, Mash, Steve.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Lidford. I'm Head of Professional Services at Codurance, and with me is Mashooq Badar and Sandro Mancuso, who were the founders of the company and really grew it out of the roots out of its roots in the London software craftsmanship community. Today is going to be a kind of conversation around software modernization. Really happy to answer any questions that you have if you pop them in the Q&A window. But I guess the first thing is really to define what the term is. So maybe Mash first. So what do you see as what do you think of the term software modernization?
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for picking me first as well. But right, so hello everybody. So software modernization, at its core, is actually about change. It's about software changing alongside the business. So software should change at least as fast as the business does, and that's where you get the business agility. Often that's not the case. In fact, often the business is hostage to the software. The speed at which the software can move, the business can move only as fast as that. So it is about change, but it's also about risk as well. So there are many risks. There are risks of software not working correctly and the customers getting dissatisfied. There are security risks. There are you losing your data. There are risks of not understanding what your customers want and so on. So software modernization is also about mitigating all those risks, aligning your software, and much more than that, the capability of building that software towards your business so that your business is enabled by it. And eventually, if the software moves as fast as the business and faster, then you can truly start innovating, and you can use software as the engine for innovation of your business. So that's effectively what software modernization is in a nutshell.
Yeah, so for me, like adding to what Mash was saying is a continuous process, right? I don't think that software modernization is one thing that you do and start and stop. For me, any company that relies on software, mainly strategic software, should have a continuous improvement program. And software modernization is about that, is that continuous process of improving strategic systems, right? And the word strategic is also key here as well, because there is a difference from regular maintenance of your system. There is those small refactorings, those writing tests, maintaining your tests. That's the regular maintenance as we go along. Software modernization for me is something more strategic, right? So that you plan for, it's continuous, but it's strategic. It's not the normal maintenance.
Yeah, I actually really like the quote by Kent Beck, make the change easy and then make the easy change. And that kind of has always been associated with testing and development and so on at a lower level, but it really makes sense at all levels of the organization. And really that you continuously need to keep making that change easy, so that you can keep making the easy change.
But software modernization is not just about legacy code, right?
No, not for me. I think that the scope of modernization is actually can be quite broad. There are certainly elements, well, it can be targeted to code, for example, a classic one is like we have these big monoliths and is impeding the business to move fast, or impeding teams to collaborate well together, or increasing the length of the release. So it can have an element in code, can be an element in architecture, can be an element in replatforming, can be an element in automation. So for me, the modernization in the technology, so the modernization for me is quite broad. Although we say software modernization, it involves quite a few areas, and not only on the legacy side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And adding to that, right, this software doesn't sit in isolation, right? It's there, it's a part of the larger system, which is the organization and the business itself, right? So it's of course the end result is software in production, right? But in order to do that well, in order for software to really support your business, you really need to look after the other things. You can narrow the scope, as Sandro was saying as well. You can look at one area and you can understand that, you know, there are some low-hanging fruits, and that will make the process of building software easy, and you can start in certain places. But it's important to understand that it's not, software doesn't exist in isolation. Right?
Yeah, and before we move, like as we mentioned, legacy code, I know that Michael Feathers defined as software without test. I would probably go beyond than that. I like what Adam Thornhill is doing on the code scene. So it's way beyond than that. It's not only like there are a lot of code in there that, although they might not be well written, that doesn't mean that they are in the way of they are blocking the business, right? They are impeding the teams or the business to achieve certain things. So for me, legacy, if I wanted to think about legacy code in the context of modernization, I would be thinking like, is it a piece of code or an area of the system that is impeding the business to progress? So then for me, that is legacy. But if it's not in the way, it's not being touched, for me, it's there, it's adding value. And yeah, so I wouldn't, in that side, I would not consider legacy as part of modernization, only if it's in the way of the business.
Another way of looking at it, Sandro, is that, you know, even when you see a number of places that are seeing change happen, but if you look at it from a kind of a value stream point of view, there is an area that has the bottleneck, right? And improving areas that are either after that bottleneck or before that may not actually help you as well. So you need to not only see exactly where change is happening in multiple places, but actually where would you work first so that you have some impact in the wider value stream, right? So you can be doing things in certain places thinking you are improving, and you might be improving that local area, but it may not have an impact at all.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect to consider as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We talked. We mentioned the word value a lot there, right? And I think it's easy to try and justify them justify the value of building new features in our software. But software modernization is not necessarily about new features, right? So how do we go about justifying, or what's the business value to a software modernization program? Maybe Sandro, you want to pick that first?
I could go, yeah. So I think we got used to the idea that value is something that we provide to our clients, right? So there is a big association in quite a few teams that it needs to be a feature, it needs to be to a customer, it needs to be something that you use. And I think that this is, I even blogged a while back called minimum viable increments. So I was talking about valuable increments. That's the point that I was trying to make. So for me, a valuable increment might be a feature, might be something to the end user, but might also be something that, for example, enable our tests to run faster. So, or enable teams to work in parallel. Maybe as Mash, I think that we were referring before, there's an area of contention where everyone is changing at the same time. This is an area that's very unstable. So stabilizing that area allows teams to work in parallel. Or maybe there is a performance of your system, or there is cost involved with your deployment or your platform that you are using. So all of those things, they are valuable. So they are adding value to the company. So if we remove the focus from the value to the end user, but put the focus on the value to the company paying for the system, or the area paying for the system, the definition of value widens up. And I think that all those technical improvements, now you can see the value of those technical improvements for the company that is building the software, and not only for the customers that they might have.
I think it's like saying value to the business as a whole, right? Isn't it? Right. It's when you value to the business, as we were saying, it could be that they can deploy faster, right? They can deploy more often. Because of that, they can get more feedback from their deployments. They can move faster in the market, and they can release more features to their customers. So eventually, if the value to the business is eventually even a most technical team kind of translates into the value to the business, right? Whether it's cost, whether it's end user, whether it's risk, all those things are value eventually.
Yeah, and you know, like in those places where you have loads of people, like you have the developers, the testers, the operations people, product owners, managers, so on. So everyone knows that things are not going well, right? So each one of them have their own perspectives. And I think that we more, and I'll include myself as a developer here or a more technical person, when we are trying to drive technical change, because we know the shortcomings of the technology, right? We know how much our code sucks, or the automation is broken, so we can see all those technical issues, but we fail. So I was thinking, why do we fail to make that case? Because for us, it's so clear, the inefficiencies and stuff. And I think that we fail because we fail to translate those inefficiencies to business value. We don't speak the same business language. So if we could say, okay, so things are taking too long to test, or it's very difficult to test and stuff. Okay, well, that's the value, right? We can shorten the QA cycle. We can deploy faster if we could rely on that. So is that another thing that we do is we go for a solution. So we identify problems in our head and say, okay, the code sucks, this is broken, this is shit, blah, blah. And then we say, in our head, we have a solution for that. And then we go to the business and say, we need to do TDD. We need to go microservices. We go with a solution. Mm-hmm. But what we fail is to agree on the problem. And I think that this is when the conversation back to value that we're talking about is making sure that we, first of all, agree with the problem. If we understand the problem, we will understand the value of solving that problem. Mm-hmm. And then we can come in with the solutions. At that point, it will be a much easier conversation. Right?
Yeah. Often I think because we are so involved in this kind of thing, we kind of think, well, And also is to do with the culture as well. Sometimes we think, the circles that we hang out, everyone agrees, testing and development is a good thing, releasing often is a good thing, automation, those kind of good things. And we kind of get like perplexed that, why is the business, why do they not care about it? When we say, we're going to release often, they say, okay, great. But what does that mean to me from a sponsor's perspective? What do I get? Okay, you can release more often. You're making change happen more often. What does that mean? You pair programming, right? You're telling me 2 people are now going to do one person's job, right? Okay, you're telling me it's great, but how is it great for me, right? What does it mean for me? And also, I think it's these kind of things, because we talk about these solutions, it's very difficult to measure what's improved, right? We can be saying, we are now doing test-driven development, but actually, what are you measuring? Are you really measuring the defects in production? And are you keeping a trend for that and correlating that and telling the business, look, now the risk of things going wrong is less because we are doing this thing, right? We are very bad at doing that kind of thing. We are good at getting to know what test-driven development is, honing our skill within it, but actually convincing the business and keeping a metric on it and measuring that progress is something that we often actually sometimes don't even care about.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to metrics later, but it can be difficult, can't it? Because bugs in production, this is something that you may not observe for quite a long time after kicking off a software modernization program. It can be a little while because you might not necessarily be releasing new features or making changes in a particular area for a while. So we see a number of problems. So Sandro, you mentioned something interesting there before, and certainly something that I've seen over the last few years. You can tell by going and spending a couple of hours with a team whether their software is any good or not, without seeing any code, right? Just from the morale within the team. You can sit with the team, and if you're sitting down around with a bunch of frustrated developers, it's generally a pretty safe bet that their software's in a bit of a mess and they find it very difficult just to do their work, right? And that'd be frustrating for anyone. What's some of the kind of other common problems that we see that would kind of indicate that we might benefit from some modernization of our software?
So, well, I think that we, as I was saying, is identifying that value, right? So it's when you are trying to drive change and make that business case. So what problem we are trying to solve? So for example, some benefits that we could have, as Mash was saying before, sustainable change, right? So making sure that the system is always in a state where it's easy to make the change that we need. So that is like one of the benefits of our improvement. So, and as you were saying before, we have that data. The team has that data. Mm-hmm. They know how long things are taking to be done. Another one, a lot of businesses say we'd like to innovate, right? So innovation doesn't just happen. So you need to design your system in a way where it's easy to innovate. So if you are able to architect your system in a way where you can isolate areas and say, I want to innovate in one area, I want to introduce, let's say, a new payment method, or I want to, I don't know, change how I do the user interface or the user journey. All of those things, the system needs to be designed, architect for that innovation, so that it's safe to do that without creating a big impact. Then there is technology, business alignment. One common thing that we normally don't talk about, that is as we've been doing this work for quite a long time now, and our clients were saying, we are struggling to attract and maintain talent. Mm-hmm. And this is a thing that it took me a while to understand. So, oh shit, yeah, that is true, right? So if you want to attract talent and maintain the talent, right? So you need to have a technology staff that is up to date, that is modern and stuff, and because that's what talented people are after. They are after that challenge, right? So the working I see that a lot of developers, it's not that you need to have that to hire, but you need to have the intention to have that to hire. A lot of people and I include myself on that, I love a modernization challenge, right? So taking something that is not great, but the company has the mindset to change, has the mindset to improve. that attracts talents, that keeps people excited of driving that change and that. So those are things that Mash mentioned, risk management as well. So there are many different aspects where a company can benefit. We just need to figure out according to the issues that we have and what the company would benefit from, and then do that match.
I think this is an interesting area to explore, isn't it? Like why people are unhappy in software projects, right? Because like often it just seems like there's a bunch of things. Projects that require modernization, there are a few telltale signs that really get people, well, angry and frustrated. One is like a lot of management and organization, right? Because when everything is intertwined and entangled, you got multiple teams that needing to speak to each other to do a release. You have kind of code freezes and everyone's on call middle of the night because a release is going through, or you've been trying to release for the past 2 weeks and you haven't managed it, and you got like maybe one release every 3 months or 6 months or even a year in some cases, right? All these things actually play on people actually doing the work, right? So first there is a lot of organizing, not a lot of doing. So people think that when can they actually get down to doing the actual work? Then on top of that, there is a lot of fear attached to making change. So then, if that release goes out, or if I make this change, so people make change in small places, but not really look at the holistic thing. They just add that thing and kind of get it out of the door because I don't want to be the one who made the next bug happen, right? And then the other thing is not seeing the results of your effort, right? You are spending a lot of effort in doing, in working, in making change, in creating new features, in building stuff, but you don't see it out in the, you don't see users or the business using it. It's been sitting in kind of this next release that's going on for the past 6 months. You don't see it. So you stop caring about what you're doing. It no longer is an exciting prospect. You're not seeing the results from what you're doing. So also that I think frustrates developers and other people involved in the development effort as well, I think.
Okay, and we talked about this kind of modernization being a goal in itself, with the kind of business value behind it. But does this mean we're not pushing new features at the same time? Is it kind of halt and catch up, or are we able to kind of mix and match?
Yeah, so we were discussing before the principles behind software modernization, right? So, and one of the things that we discussed was it should have minimal business disruption. I cannot say it should have no business disruption because that is not realistic. But we should work in a way where we create the minimum business disruption. So modernization by itself, like we are not adding new features. It's almost like another way of thinking is like a refactoring. It's not just refactoring that you change the code but without changing the behavior. Imagine it in a much more strategic and wider scale, like architecture, deployment, and everything else, right? So of course, we don't want to be working on modernization projects and stopping the business for months, because some of those changes in modernization are big. So there are a lot of techniques that we use so that we don't stop the business. Some of them is actually even use new features of the business, for example, to drive the modernization through new features. There are a lot of different techniques. We can talk more about that if people are interested or we get there, but like one of the principles is it should have minimal business disruption.
Sometimes though, definitely, I think that's, business can't stop. You can't stop making money, right? But sometimes what happens is that, the way that you are making change happen, like, for example, you're releasing every 6 months, but you're saying everyone must be working on the new feature. But actually, you're releasing every 6 months, right? So at the end of the day, the value or the rate of change is 6 months, right? So there is an example from LinkedIn. They actually, when of course, they have, there are always lots of different ways of making change happen, and you should not disrupt the business. But sometimes it actually becomes a necessity. Or actually, you may think you're disrupting it, but you're not really, because if you're releasing every 6 months, you're not really. And LinkedIn actually did that when they had, they basically got to almost a halt, right? They ground to a halt. They had a Java-based system as well, called Leo, I think it was called. And it was causing a lot of problems. They had this shared data layer, and they had database developers on one side and backend developers on the other, and big release trains. And they actually stopped for 2 months. And they said, okay, let's look at all the things that are stopping us from shipping our product faster. And let's see what we can do. Let's time box it to 2 months. And let's plan it well, and let's see what we can do. And out of that, they came up with all these platforms and the open source stuff. That was the genesis of it that then came out. And a lot of other people are using some of their tools that were produced at that time. So it depends really, you know, and you have to look at all the different strategies. There is this continuous improvement that you need to make, but sometimes you just need to stop. Like in Lean, it's like there's a whole kind of pull the cord or Kaizen burst, right? Is that, you know, you look at an area or a workstation in manufacturing that is actually causing errors or causing problems, and everyone swarms on that, you know, and fixes that. Once that's fixed, you know, you move back to the norm. So there are many different ways of doing it, and in your context, you may have to adopt quite a few of these different ways of working in order to make that continuous change happen.
Yeah. Well, and just like to add, also even in this context where normally this happens like with the smaller teams or areas that have a single team and they really need to make a disruptive change in order to modernize. Even when the time we start, it should be time boxed, right? So you need to time box. You cannot just say like we're gonna keep improving the system until we are happy with that. So it doesn't work like that, right? So you need to run a series of spikes, experiments, but they need to be time boxed. And they need to be prioritized by value as well, right? So another thing that we were also discussing on principles that ties back to this is the law of diminishing returns, right? So you will never be able to improve 100% your system. And it's not worth it either, right? So there is like it's like the Pareto's law, the 80-20 thing. So sometimes if you just concentrate on the 20% more important aspects of the improvements, you might get a good benefit out of it, but it's not worth going beyond. So time box, make sure that it's focused, and then in that case, it would be okay, assuming that we agree on the business value of that.
We have a question from Ed. It says, who asked, what common but difficult pain points do you think exist? What are the particularly difficult things that we come across?
Oh, so it depends on which area we are talking about here, because there are so many different types of pain points, right? So if you take all those different people from the management, the QA, the developers, the operators, so there are the users, there are many different types of pain points in here. So I need to try to place the different pain points. So instead of saying like so if I try to tackle them all in one go, so one exercise that we love doing in the initial phases of the modernization projects is what we call value stream mapping, right? So a value stream mapping is a very good way to understand all those pain points from different perspectives. So you take like from an idea all the way to software in production, and you map that value stream, everything that happens, every step on the flow. And then you see the amount of work that is done in each one of those steps, the amount of times that if something goes wrong in one of those stages, how far back they go, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a good way to map from different perspectives. And this is an exercise that you do with all those, with a diverse set of people, right? So developers, managers and stuff, each one of them will have their own visibility. With a value stream mapping, you will map that out, all the pain points, the bottlenecks, the inefficiencies in the processes, and that's a good start, a good starting point for a discussion in value, and later on to a solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the value stream mapping. A lot of it is related to waste, whether things are being blocked or things that need to come back because tester at the end saw a defect that actually should have been caught right at the beginning, and it's kind of come back. So a lot of those wastes, I guess, translate to pain points from different points of view. Another thing, Sandra, we were talking about a while back about team topologies, the book, and it talks about cognitive load within the team, right? That's an interesting concept because actually that is more of an indication of pain points existing within the team, right? So it actually doesn't talk about a particular pain point. As you said, there are many, and depending on the perspective, but the collective cognitive load of a team effectively speaks about all the pain that they have in their work, right? So cognitive load could be related to entangled software, right? Because they only need to work on this particular area, but what happens is that they have to kind of bring into their mind everything else that's happening. Not only that, but what other teams may be doing as well. So the more their kind of blast radius of change increases, the bigger the cognitive load. So that's like one area of the cognitive load. But there could be other things. For example, if there is a lot of manual processes, they can't just click a button and send this into a test environment where they have lots of automated tests that verify. So now they have to worry about, well, what have I done? I mean, have I broken anything? Again, that adds to that load. All this organization that has to be done adds to the load because they're being given tasks by the supposed product owner, right? But they don't know what that relates to. They've kind of done it, but they're then being, slated by the delivery manager or something to say, you haven't finished this thing or you haven't done it properly and so on. But they don't understand what actually really needed to be done. So there are so many different ways that this cognitive loading increases. And in team topologies, it talks about all the different ways that you can remediate your software, the processes, and all those things to actually reduce the cognitive load, and how you organize the teams to reduce that cognitive load. I think that's another good way of looking at it.
True. And that leads you to that conversation about the Conway's law as well, right? So it is making sure that the system is designed according to the communication structure of the company. But like we have in software modernization projects, we have the opportunity to do what is called the reverse Conway's maneuver. Right, so we identify everything that is going wrong. So maybe the software is entangled, the architecture is not suitable for the business goals and everything else. So it got there for a few reasons. So when you are modernizing, what you are trying to do, you're trying to re-architect your system or rearrange your system or solve some of the problems that Mesh was describing. To reduce the cognitive loads about the team. Basically, what this also means is that you are trying to make the teams more autonomous, right? So you increase the communication within the team, but we reduce the communication across teams, right? So that creates that autonomy across teams. But for that, the architecture of your system, the design of your system needs to support that. And that's what we call the reverse Conway's maneuver, is to start re-architecting your systems to separate those functional areas from each other, to isolate those problems, to remove the areas that we call hotspots where everyone is working on, so to end the hotspots. So this way you will enable the teams to be autonomous, reduce the cognitive load, and you are pushing a reverse Conway's maneuver from the design of your system to the organization of your teams.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mashooq, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, that kind of goes back down to another very fundamental concept in software design. That's, coupling and cohesion, right? So high cohesion, low coupling. That's what we talk about. Highly cohesive, low coupled teams actually can only be realized if you have a highly cohesive, low coupled system. Right, so they kind of act with each other, and that's the Conway's law in a way as well.
So Mike's asked, you make a very good point about the cognitive load, but how do you gauge that in a team? How do you know that the cognitive load is too much?
Um, I mean, it's about actually the cognitive load is about, first of all, it's about the amount of organization or synchronization that needs to happen across teams. So you can look at across teams first, right? How much synchronization needs to happen for this team to do its work, right? So that's one source of a lot of different types of cognitive, and that could be, you know, your product owners are sat in a different team and you constantly have to talk to them, right? Or or your platform, you don't have a platform team and you kind of have to push to ops, you give a release to ops, and then there is a lot of to and froing in terms of how that release happens, right? So that's the kind of cross team interaction. Again, going back to the amount of connections or touch points you have between teams, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one area to kind of look at, and you can gauge, you know, just like you can look at complexity of a module and the dependencies going out, and you, Sandro, you call it fan in and fan out, right? Yeah. How many teams depend on you and how many teams you depend on. So that is a source, and you can actually kind of measure it from that as well. Yeah. But then internally as well, you can look at the cognitive load, because even if you internally, you can look at, well, what kind of focus does the team have, right? Is the team doing lots of things at once, right? You can look at things like unplanned work, for example. You can look at defects coming back in, right? You can look at interruptions from outside. Again, that's related to external connections with the team. So there are a lot of things that are source of this cognitive, and then internally you can look at the software itself, the design of that software itself, right? How entangled it is, even within your own module, your own kind of subsystem that you are looking after. If you've done that well, how entangled is that, right? How big is what I like to think of as blast radius for the changes that you are making? How big? How many people you need to kind of constantly keep in sync? So there are different ways of looking at it, and you can measure those. I don't think there is one thing, but then on top of that, you know, there is the human part as well, right? How much are people enjoying the work within the team? Because that also adds to the social aspects within the team, the dynamics of the team itself add to the cognitive load. And you can look at that, for example, at Codurance, we have Office Vibe, where we look at team health within it, right? And across many different areas, how the team, how happy, how effective, how, you know, what the team is feeling like, right? And that is not a quantitative measure, but more kind of a qualitative measure, right? So that's kind of getting feedback from people through surveys and one-to-ones.
Sure.
Remember,
we are running out of time. There's a, sorry.
So just a quick one, like on the cognitive load. I remember having a conversation about that in Codurance. I think it was with James Burney and one of our principal consultants. And he was saying that, of course, a very rustic, very simplistic way of measuring, but like is measuring how many meetings are you having with people that are outside your teams.
Oh,
right? So that shows everything that you need to know outside your domain, or everything that you are doing for some, as you are building your tasks, building your features within your domain, how many things you cannot do with the fear that you're going to break something outside of your domain. So that is also part of the cognitive.
That's cool. That's cool. We do have a couple of questions. We've only got a short time left. So one from Stefan, who says, as you mentioned, for me, software modernization also means changing a way of working. How do you motivate a team that is absolutely resistant to change?
So from my perspective, it goes back to agree on the problem first. You cannot convince people to do something if they don't see what the problem is. So for example, if you identify a problem, if the team that you are referring to don't see the world like you see, don't see the same problem, you have zero chances to convince them, unless that you try to really like top down try to do that, but you're going to destroy the team anyway, right? So either they're going to leave or just pretend that they're going. But this is for me the key. So this is where we all fail, and I include myself sometimes, right? So we fail to agree. We think that we know all. We know what the problems, we have the solution, we know the problems, we know the solutions, and then we get frustrated why no one else sees that. But I think that's where we fail. We fail on agreeing on the problem. We say, hey, is this really a problem, or is it just a problem for me? And if they don't see it as a problem, then start seeing like, is there a way for them to see that we could be more efficient, or drive them in a way that they would see that there is a problem, or things could be in a different way? That's for me is the starting point. If we are able to achieve that, if everyone agrees on the problem, you have a much easier path to find a solution.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, Mash, just one last question. We only have a couple of minutes. So it's from Ed saying that he was recently thinking about software modernization, and how much scope do you see for technology, so components of cloud platforms, etc., to make software modernization easier? So I guess sorry, go on.
So I'm just trying to read this. So how much scope do you see components to make this easy? This is a wider question, actually. And we were talking about this, right? This is kind of the question is related to the platform, and also build by partner type thing as well, right? Now, when you one of the things that we are very keen on exploring with our customers, and we do that all the time, and sometimes they kind of see it a little weirdly, is that we build software, but then we're telling them don't build it, buy that piece of software. Because one thing that's really important is that software is notoriously difficult to build. So build the minimum, right? So you can do kind of there are lots of different exercises, right? So Wordly maps is, for example, one of them, and we use that for some of our customers. What do you build, what do you buy, and what do you kind of partner with others with? And like using cloud platforms and so on is part of this, right? I think, building a platform to deploy your application is a massive undertaking in its own. If you're gonna build your platform to deploy and to run your application, as well as build the application itself, you're taking on two big jobs. You're not taking on one job, right? So when we go and speak to our customers, if there often is a lot of complexity in the way that they deploy software. And this is where we help them automate and move towards the cloud, so that they commoditize the areas that need to be commoditized, that are not their business. That is not where they get the unique kind of USP for their business, right? And it's not their main expertise, and it's not their area of focus, right? So let someone else do it. And right now there are so many options available, and they are cheaper eventually. Like, a lot of times people say, oh, I'm gonna take Jenkins and host it on my own machine, and it's gonna be cheaper. Actually, the amount of time you're gonna spend on building that and constantly maintaining it and so on, you're gonna spend way more time than to just go to a SaaS-based solution, right? So yes, I think cloud, and not just cloud offerings like Azure and so on, but also SaaS-based solutions where you're not even, it's a very well-defined product, right? And it fits in a very well-defined need, right? You kind of move that out, you kind of you buy that, and you move on to the areas that really matter to you, right? And software modernization, part of the software modernization strategy, and that's why we actually look at modularization as well. Modularization is a strategy in finding those areas that are commoditized, that we can then go to SaaS partners or cloud-based solutions, or partner with others and those kind of things, right?
So I'm afraid we are out of time. It's absolutely flown by. I guess if people want more information, the best place to go is to go to codurance.com/services, and you can read a lot more about software modernization on there. We have some tools on there, the Compass tool that Nicole mentioned earlier, and some tools in there to do things like help you to create a business case for your software modernization project. But yeah, unless you've got any parting thoughts, Sandro or Mash, I guess it's over to Nicole.
No, it's just a lot of fun. It's just like I didn't even see the time going by.
No.
So
Time flies. And we can talk
again.
for a whole day about this, and
Yeah.
it's surprising how quickly the
And
time
often
went,
do.
actually.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you, Sandro, Mash, Steve, for giving us a peek into your everyday of sharing and discussing as well. I think that was a really awesome session. There's a lot of branch off topics and references to further explore. I know I'll be checking out the skills cast so I can delve into those as well. Thank you everyone for your questions and your comments and for contributing to the discussion as well. Like Steve said, if you have any further questions that come to mind, maybe you'll be reviewing the skills cast and that's where it'll pop into mind too. Feel free to reach out to the Codurance team at hello@codurance.com. I'll pop that into the chat. And you can also find out more about our panelists in the event link on the Skills Matter website. Thanks to all the panelists.